They were designed to obey without question, bred in silence beneath an endless ocean, each one carrying the face of a single man and the will of a republic that never asked if they wanted to fight. But when the Force awakened inside them, when 10,000 soldiers began to feel the galaxy breathing through their veins, the Jedi realized they had not created an army. They had given birth to something that could not be controlled. And in the shadows of Coruscant, a Sith Lord who had spent decades preparing his perfect betrayal understood that his weapon had just learned to think. If the clones could sense the light, could they also be claimed by the dark? And when the order to kill every Jedi finally came, would they pull the trigger, or would they choose to burn the galaxy down rather than become slaves again? The storm never touched Kamino's surface, but it raged all the same. Lightning carved the sky into fractured geometries, each bolt reflecting in the endless black ocean below, and in that perpetual twilight the cloning facilities rose like monuments to precision and control. Within the sterile halls, beneath layers of reinforced duranium and transparisteel, 10,000 soldiers grew in silence. They floated in amniotic suspension, each one identical to the last, each one engineered for a singular purpose: obedience. The Kaminoans had perfected the art of replication, stripping away choice and nurturing only function. But the Force, ancient and wild, cared nothing for design, and on a night when the storm screamed louder than usual, something within those vats began to wake. Jedi Master Shaak Ti felt it first as a tremor in her meditation, a ripple that did not belong to the ocean's rhythm or the thunder's pulse. She opened her eyes in the observation chamber, overlooking Growth Facility 7, her crimson skin pale in the cold blue light. Around her, rows of transparent cylinders stretched into shadow, each one cradling a clone in accelerated development. The troopers inside were months from deployment, their features still soft, their armor yet to be fitted. She had walked these halls 100 times, had felt the quiet hum of life growing under careful supervision. But tonight, that hum had changed. It vibrated with something deeper, something vast and awakening. She rose from her seated position and approached the nearest cylinder. The trooper within floated in pale suspension fluid, eyes closed, breathing regulated by the machinery embedded in the tank's walls. His face bore the sharp symmetry of Jango Fett's legacy, the template that had given birth to an army. Shaak Ti pressed her hand against the transparisteel, reaching out through the Force, expecting the usual emptiness she encountered in clones, a life present but muted, shaped entirely by genetic instruction. Instead, she met a current. It surged up to meet her awareness, raw and unfiltered, a consciousness that flickered with instinct and emotion. She jerked her hand back, breath catching. The clone's eyes opened. They stared at her through the fluid, wide and unseeing, pupils dilated. Then his hand rose, pressing against the glass from within, mirroring her gesture. The Force pulsed between them, a fragile bridge of sensation and wonder. Shaak Ti's heartbeat quickened. This was not supposed to happen. Clones were not Force-sensitive. Their genetic compression, their accelerated growth, the 1,000 manipulations that made them viable soldiers, all of it should have rendered them invisible to the Force's deeper currents. Yet here, undeniable and trembling with potential, was a mind reaching out across the void. She turned sharply and moved down the corridor, her robes trailing behind her. The sensation grew stronger with each step. It was not isolated to one trooper. She felt it emanating from every cylinder, a chorus of nascent awareness blossoming in unison. Panic flared in her chest, not fear of the clones themselves, but fear of what this meant. An army of Force-sensitives, bound by identical genetics and shared purpose, represented a phenomenon without precedent. The Jedi had spent millennia training individuals to wield the Force with discipline and wisdom. What would happen if 10,000 soldiers awakened to that same power simultaneously, without guidance, without the philosophical anchors that kept Jedi from sliding into darkness? She reached the central monitoring station where Lama Su, the Prime Minister of Kamino, stood observing data streams with clinical detachment. His tall, slender form bent slightly as he turned to acknowledge her presence. His black eyes betrayed no emotion, only curiosity. "Master Jedi," he said, his voice smooth and measured. "You appear troubled." "The clones," Shakti said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Something has changed in them. I can feel them in the Force." Lama Su tilted his head, the gesture almost avian. "That is impossible. Our genetic protocols ensure stability. Force sensitivity is a random mutation, one we specifically screened against during template selection. Jango Fett carried no such traits. Then your screening failed." Shakti gestured toward the rows of cylinders. "Or something else has happened. I need access to the growth logs, the chemical breakdowns of their development cycle. There must be an explanation." The Kaminoan hesitated, his long fingers hovering over the control panel. For a species that prided itself on precision, admitting error was tantamount to heresy, but he nodded slowly and activated a series of holographic displays. Data cascaded into the air between them, genetic markers, hormone balances, environmental variables monitored across millions of growth cycles. Shakti scanned them with increasing urgency, her training allowing her to parse the scientific language, even as her focus remained split between the readouts and the growing presence in the Force behind her. Then she saw it. Buried deep in the developmental timeline, a notation marked as anomalous but dismissed by automated systems. During the last orbital storm, electromagnetic interference had disrupted power distribution across 3 growth facilities. Backup generators had maintained life support, but for 17 minutes, the nutrient mixture feeding the clones had been exposed to unfiltered ionization from Kamino's magnetic field. The Kaminoans had flagged it, tested for physical abnormalities, found none, and moved on. But the Force did not operate by rules the Kaminoans understood. "This," Shakti said, pointing to the notation. "This is when it happened." Lama Su examined the data with renewed scrutiny. The exposure was minimal. All physical parameters remained within acceptable tolerances. "The Force is not bound by your tolerances." Shakti turned back toward the cylinders, her mind racing. "Ionization can alter midi-chlorian activity in developing organisms. If the clones were exposed at a critical stage of neural development, it could have triggered dormant genetic pathways. Sensitivity to the Force is hereditary but also environmental. You didn't just grow an army, you created a Force-sensitive species." The weight of her words settled into the cold air. Lama Su remained silent, processing implications that stretched far beyond his expertise. Shakti knew she had to act quickly. This discovery could not remain confined to Kamino. The Jedi Council needed to know. More urgently, someone needed to guide these awakening minds before their power manifested without understanding. But even as she formulated her next steps, another presence brushed against her awareness. It was distant but deliberate, a shadow moving through the Force with practiced invisibility. Someone else was watching, someone who had been waiting for exactly this kind of disruption. The storm outside intensified, and Shakti felt the galaxy tilt toward a future none of them were prepared to face. The Force shuddered. Coruscant burned with light even in the hours before dawn, a world that never slept, its trillion souls compressed into endless vertical cities. In the Senate building's highest tower, Chancellor Palpatine stood alone in his private office, hands clasped behind his back, gazing out at the skyline. To any observer, he appeared contemplative, a leader burdened by the weight of war and the Republic's slow fracture. But in the Force, hidden beneath layers of carefully maintained illusion, his mind churned with cold calculation. He had felt the disturbance. It rippled through the dark side like a stone dropped into still water, emanating from the outer rim, from Kamino. For a moment, he had allowed himself to believe it was merely another Jedi discovery, some minor fluctuation in the cosmic order that would fade into irrelevance. But as the sensation clarified, as his connection to the Sith network of spies and informants began feeding him fragments of information, the truth crystallized. The clones were awakening. Palpatine's expression did not change, but deep within the recesses of his mind, Darth Sidious smiled. This was an unforeseen complication, one that threatened decades of meticulous planning. The Grand Army of the Republic had been designed as the perfect instrument of betrayal, loyal soldiers engineered to execute Order 66 without question or hesitation. Their inhibitor chips ensured obedience, their accelerated conditioning erased doubt. They were meant to be tools, nothing more. But tools that could touch the Force were no longer tools. They became variables, and variables could ruin everything. He turned from the window and moved to his desk, activating a secure holotransmitter. The blue light flickered, and a hooded figure materialized in miniature before him. Count Dooku, his apprentice, bowed his head in acknowledgement. "Master," Dooku said, his voice smooth and aristocratic. "I sense your displeasure. The clones have developed an anomaly," Palpatine said, his tone neutral but edged with quiet menace. "They are becoming Force-sensitive." Dooku's surprise was subtle but unmistakable. "That should be impossible," the Kaminoans assured us. "The Kaminoans are scientists, not Sith. They understand genetics but not the Force's capacity for disruption." Palpatine leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "This changes the timeline. If the Jedi discover the extent of this mutation, they will attempt to train the clones, to integrate them into the Order. An army of Force-sensitives loyal to the Jedi would be unstoppable. Worse, if the clones form a collective consciousness, they could resist the inhibitor chips entirely." Dooku considered this, his expression darkening. "Then we must accelerate the Separatist offensive, force the Republic to deploy the clones before the Jedi can intervene." "No." Palpatine's voice hardened. "That would only draw attention to the issue. The Jedi are already investigating. I need time to recalibrate our control mechanisms. The inhibitor chips must be modified to suppress their connection to the Force entirely. If we cannot prevent their awakening, we will chain it. And if that fails?" Palpatine straightened, his presence in the Force expanding like a shadow swallowing light. "Then we will ensure that their awakening serves us. A Force-sensitive army bound to the dark side would be worth more than 1,000 Jedi." The transmission ended, and Palpatine stood in silence, his mind already calculating the steps required. He would need to contact the Kaminoans directly, frame the modification as a Republic security measure. He would need to ensure Shaak Ti's investigation was delayed, misdirected, or if necessary, silenced. And he would need to begin seeding doubt among the Jedi Council, planting the idea that the clones' new abilities represented a threat rather than an opportunity. But beneath all these tactical considerations, a deeper question gnawed at him. The Force had introduced chaos into his perfect design. Was this merely random mutation, or was it something more? The dark side thrived on control, on bending the galaxy's will to singular purpose. Yet the Force itself, light and dark, had always possessed an element of rebellion, a tendency to resist absolute dominion. If the clone's awakening was the Force's answer to his grand design, then he was facing not just a complication but a counterbalance. He moved to the window again, watching the city's lights flicker and pulse. Somewhere out there, Jedi Masters debated philosophy in the temple's high chambers. Somewhere beyond the atmosphere, clone battalions prepared for deployment, unaware of the power stirring in their blood. And on Kamino, Shaak Ti stood at the precipice of a revelation that could reshape the galaxy. Palpatine allowed himself a thin smile. Chaos was an opportunity for those who knew how to exploit it. If the Force wanted to introduce a new variable, he would master it, bend it, and ultimately use it to crown his empire in fire. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. Shaak Ti descended into the lower training levels of Tipoca City with urgency, sharpening her every movement. The Kaminoan architecture here was older, built during the early phases of the clone project, and the walls carried a faint scent of salt and ozone. Around her, the hum of machinery blended with the distant roar of waves crashing against the city's stilts. She had requested immediate access to the first batch of fully mature clones, the ones scheduled for deployment within the week. If the Force sensitivity was universal, it would be most evident in those who had completed accelerated training and stood on the threshold of war. Lama Su walked beside her, his stride unnaturally smooth, his expression betraying only mild concern. "Master Jedi, I must caution you. Interfering with the clone's final conditioning could introduce psychological instability. They are prepared for combat, not philosophical exploration. I have no intention of destabilizing them, Shakti replied, though she knew her words carried little weight against the Kaminoans' clinical worldview. But if they are force-sensitive, they need guidance. Without it, their power could manifest in ways neither of us can predict. They entered a vast training hall where rows of clones in white armor moved through synchronized drills. The sound of blaster fire echoed in controlled bursts, each shot hitting its target with mechanical precision. But Shakti's attention was not on their accuracy. She focused on the force, extending her awareness across the chamber, and what she felt made her breath catch. They were connected. Not consciously, not yet, but the force flowed between them like an invisible web, linking each clone to his brothers. When one trooper adjusted his stance, the others responded a fraction of a second later, their movements harmonizing without verbal communication. It was subtle, instinctive, the kind of battlefield coordination that took veteran units years to develop. But these clones had been together for mere months. She approached the nearest trooper, a soldier whose armor bore the designation CT-7567. He stood at attention, his helmet under one arm, his face sharp and focused. When he met her gaze, Shakti felt the force presence within him flare curious, alert, and tinged with something she could only describe as hunger. "Trooper," she said gently, "do you feel anything unusual during combat drills?" CT-7567 hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Define unusual." "Sir, a sense of connection to your brothers. An awareness that extends beyond sight or sound." His eyes flickered with recognition, then confusion. "I thought that was normal. We're trained to work as a unit, not like this." Shakti gestured subtly toward the other troopers. "You're not just working together, you're sharing awareness through the Force. Do you understand what that means?" The trooper stared at her, processing information that had no place in his conditioning. "The Force is what the Jedi use. We're soldiers. You are also living beings connected to the same energy that binds the galaxy together. That connection has awakened in you." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "This is not a malfunction. It is a gift, but it requires training, discipline, or it could become dangerous." CT-7567 glanced at his brothers, and Shakti felt the ripple of communication pass between them, wordless, instantaneous. They were already learning to use their bond, adapting it into their tactics without realizing what they were doing. The potential was staggering. A squad of clones moving as one mind, predicting enemy movements before they happened, coordinating attacks with perfect synchronization. But the risk was equally immense. Without philosophical grounding, without understanding the balance between light and dark, they could become an army of unstable force wielders, vulnerable to corruption or madness. "What do we do, sir?" the trooper asked, and for the first time, Shakti heard uncertainty in his voice. "You continue your training," she said, "but I will be adding something to your regimen. Meditation, focus exercises, ways to understand what is happening inside you. Can you trust me?" CT-7567 nodded slowly. "We trust the Jedi, sir. That's what we're told." "Then trust this. You are more than weapons, and the galaxy needs you to understand that before you are deployed." She turned to Lama Su, who had observed the exchange with unreadable expression. "I need to speak with the Jedi Council immediately, and I need authorization to begin force training with the clones." The Kaminoan's silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, he inclined his head. "I will prepare a secure transmission, but Master Jedi, you must understand these clones are Republic property. Any modifications to their training will require approval from the Senate. Then we will get it." Shakti's voice carried steel. One way or another, she left the training hall, her mind already racing through the arguments she would need to present. The Jedi Council would be divided. Some would see the clones' awakening as a blessing, a sign that the Force was providing the Republic with a new kind of guardian. Others would see it as a threat, a disruption of the Order's carefully maintained structure. And the Senate, manipulated by Palpatine's political machinations, would likely view it through the lens of control and utility. But none of that mattered as much as the truth she carried. The clones were not just awakening to the Force, they were forming something unprecedented. A shared consciousness. A collective presence that resonated in harmony. If nurtured, they could become a new kind of Jedi, warriors who fought not as individuals, but as an interconnected whole. If corrupted, they could become something far darker. The storm outside had not abated. Lightning split the sky in jagged arcs, and in its flash, Shark T saw her reflection in the transparasteel, pale, determined, and alone against forces she barely understood. Destiny shifted around them. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant rose above the cityscape like a monument to ancient wisdom, its 5 spires piercing the sky in silent testament to millennia of tradition. Within the High Council chamber, Shark T stood at the center of the circular room, her hands folded before her, while 12 Jedi Masters observed her from their elevated seats. The holographic projection of Kamino's data floated between them, rotating slowly, each genetic marker and anomaly highlighted in clinical detail. The Council had listened in silence as she explained the mutation, the ionization event, the awakening she had felt rippling through the Force. Now, their deliberation began. Mace Windu leaned forward, his expression grave. "You are certain this is not isolated?" "All the clones share this sensitivity. Every clone in the affected growth cycle," Shakti confirmed. "That represents approximately 70% of the current army. The earlier batches remain unaffected, but production has not stopped. If the same conditions persist, all future clones will carry this trait." Yoda's ears twitched, his ancient eyes distant. "A great disturbance, this is. Unprecedented. An army born from one template, all connected through the Force. Dangerous, such unity could become. Or it could become our greatest strength," Ki Adi Mundi interjected. "Imagine battalions that move as one, that can sense danger before it strikes. The Separatists would stand no chance. Or imagine an army that can be turned against us through the dark side." Mace's voice cut through the debate. "Force sensitivity without discipline is a path to chaos. We have spent centuries training Jedi from childhood precisely because the power requires wisdom to wield. These clones are adults, conditioned for war, with no philosophical foundation. What happens when their emotions run unchecked?" Shark T had anticipated this argument. "Then we provide them with that foundation. I propose we embed Jedi in every battalion, not as generals but as teachers. We create a new kind of training that integrates combat with meditation, tactics with Force discipline. The clones are already predisposed to obedience and structure. They can learn. And if they refuse," Plo Koon's voice carried quiet concern, "if they see their power as something beyond Jedi control, they will not refuse if we treat them as partners rather than tools," Shakti insisted. "These clones are people. They deserve guidance, not suppression." Obi-Wan Kenobi spoke from his seat, his tone measured. "I agree with Master T in principle, but the logistics are staggering. We do not have enough Jedi to train an army of Force sensitives. Even if we devoted our entire order to the task, it would take years. The war will not wait." "Then we begin with the officers," Shark T said. "The commanders and captains who lead squads. If we can train them to guide their brothers, the knowledge will spread organically. The clones already share an instinctive bond. They can teach each other." Yoda tapped his gimmer stick against the floor, the sound echoing. "Assume much. You do. Assume the Force will remain balanced in them. But what if drawn to darkness they are? What if their unity becomes a weapon for the Sith?" The chamber fell silent. It was the question no one wanted to voice, but everyone had considered. If the clones could be turned, if their collective consciousness could be corrupted, the Republic would face an enemy far more terrifying than the Separatist droids. They would face themselves. Shark T met Yoda's gaze. "Then we risk everything by doing nothing. The Force has given us this opportunity. To reject it out of fear is to reject the very philosophy we claim to uphold. Trust in the Force, Master Yoda. Trust that it knows what the galaxy needs. The ancient Jedi closed his eyes, his presence in the Force expanding, searching for clarity. The chamber waited. Finally, Yoda nodded slowly. Proceed, you may. But cautiously. Monitor the clones closely. At the first sign of imbalance, intervene we must. Mace Windu's expression remained skeptical, but he did not dissent. We will authorize limited force training for select battalions. But Shaak Ti, understand this: if your experiment fails, if the clones become a threat, the Council will not hesitate to act. Is that clear? It is. Shaak Ti bowed, relief and apprehension warring within her. She had won the Council's permission, but she had also inherited a monumental responsibility. Training an army of Force sensitives was not a task she could accomplish alone. She would need allies, resources, and above all, time. As the Council dismissed her, Obi-Wan approached, his face lined with concern. Shaak Ti, may I speak with you privately? She nodded, and they moved to a quieter alcove overlooking the temple gardens. Below, younglings practiced lightsaber forms under the watchful eye of their instructors, their movements fluid and joyful. Obi-Wan watched them for a moment before speaking. I understand your conviction, he said quietly. But I fear you underestimate the complexity of what you are attempting. The clones are not children. They are soldiers bred for violence. Teaching them to wield the Force without falling to anger or fear will be nearly impossible. Nearly, Shaak Ti repeated, but not entirely. I have felt their minds, Obi-Wan. They are not empty. They carry hope, loyalty, and a desire to protect. Those are the foundations we can build on, or the vulnerabilities that will be exploited. Obi-Wan's tone softened. I do not doubt your intentions, but I have seen what war does to even the most disciplined Jedi. The clones will face horrors we cannot fully prepare them for, and when they do, their connection to the Force will amplify their suffering. Shaak Ti placed a hand on his shoulder. Then we give them the tools to endure it. We teach them that the Force is not just power, but also peace. That their bond with each other can be their anchor. I know the risks, Obi-Wan, but I also know the alternative. If we abandon them, they will stumble into darkness on their own. Obi-Wan sighed, his expression torn. Then I will support you. But please, be careful. The Senate is already watching the Jedi with suspicion. If the clones become too powerful, Palpatine will find a way to use it against us. His words struck a chord of unease deep in Shaak Ti's mind. She had felt the Chancellor's presence in the Force before, distant and veiled, but always watching. He was a politician, a manipulator of agendas, and she did not trust him. But she could not afford to focus on Senate politics when the fate of the clones hung in the balance. I will be careful, she promised. They parted, and Shaak Ti descended into the temple's lower levels, where her starship waited. She would return to Kamino immediately, begin the first stages of training, and hope that the Force would guide her steps. But as she boarded the vessel and felt the engines hum to life, a shadow passed through her awareness, cold, deliberate, and infinitely patient. Somewhere in the galaxy, someone else was making plans. The galaxy waited for an answer. On Kamino, the first training sessions began under a sky heavy with perpetual rain. Shaak Ti stood in a repurposed hangar bay, its vast space cleared of ships and equipment, its floor marked with simple circles where clones sat in meditation. 50 troopers surrounded her, their armor removed, their faces identical, yet each bearing subtle variations in expression, curiosity, skepticism, focus. She had chosen this group carefully, selecting the commanders and sergeants who showed the strongest Force presence and the most emotional stability. They would be her first students, the foundation upon which an entire philosophy would be built. The Force is not a weapon, she began, her voice carrying across the silent space. It is a current that flows through all living things. You have felt it already, in the moments when you move as one, when you sense danger before it strikes. That is not training. That is the Force responding to your need. But to truly use it, you must first understand it. One of the clones, a sergeant designated CT-5385, raised his hand. Sir, With respect, we were taught that survival depends on action. Sitting still seems counterproductive. Shakti smiled faintly. Action without thought is chaos. The Jedi do not meditate to escape battle. We meditate to ensure that when we act, we do so with purpose. You are stronger together than apart. Meditation will help you feel that connection more clearly, to trust it when words and sight fail. She guided them through the first exercise, breathing, centering, releasing tension. The clones struggled at first, their minds conditioned for constant alertness, their bodies trained to react rather than reflect. But slowly, gradually, they began to settle. Shakti felt their presences in the Force coalesce, a dozen individual flames merging into a single steady light. It was tentative, fragile, but it was there. Then something shifted. One of the clones, a younger trooper near the back, gasped and opened his eyes. His breathing quickened, panic flashing across his face. Shakti moved toward him immediately, kneeling beside him. "What did you see?" she asked gently. The trooper's voice was barely a whisper. "My brothers. Thousands of them. And they were all screaming." The vision hit Shakti like a physical blow. She reached into the Force, tracing the thread of the trooper's fear, and encountered a maelstrom of images, clones turning on Jedi, lightsabers igniting in betrayal, temples burning. It was not a memory, it was a premonition, raw and unfiltered, the kind of vision that the Force sometimes granted to those newly awakened. She pulled back, her heart pounding. "You saw a possible future, not a certain one. The Force shows us many paths, but it felt real," the trooper said, his voice cracking. "Like it already happened. The dark side feeds on fear," Shakti said, forcing calm into her tone. "What you saw is one outcome, one possibility if we fail. But we are here to ensure it does not come to pass. Do you understand?" The trooper nodded shakily, and Shakti helped him to his feet. Around them, the other clones had opened their eyes, their expressions troubled. They had felt the vision too, faint echoes bleeding through their shared connection. Shakti realized then just how dangerous this training could become. The clones' bond amplified everything's strength, fear, hope, and despair. If one fell, the others would feel it. If corruption spread, it would spread fast. She addressed the group, her voice steady. "What just happened is why we are here. The Force will show you things, some beautiful, some terrible. You must learn to discern truth from manipulation, to hold on to your center even when the galaxy tries to pull you apart. This is the path of the Jedi, and it is now your path as well." CT-5385 spoke again, his tone more serious. "Sir, if we can see the future, can we change it? That is the eternal question." Shakti looked at each of them in turn. The Jedi believe that the future is always in motion, shaped by the choices we make. But some events carry such weight that they become almost inevitable. Our task is to stand in the path of darkness and say, "Not today." Can you do that? The clones exchanged glances, and then, as one, they nodded. It was a small gesture, but in the Force, Shakti felt their resolve solidify. They were soldiers, yes, but they were also becoming something more. They were becoming guardians. The training continued for hours, pushing the clones to the edge of their endurance. Shakti taught them basic Force techniques, sensing, moving small objects, reinforcing their physical strength through the Force's current. Some adapted quickly, their instincts sharp and intuitive. Others struggled, their conditioning clashing with the meditative state required for control. But none gave up. They pushed through frustration and exhaustion because that was what they had been built to do. As the session ended and the clones filed out, Shakti remained in the hangar, meditating on what she had accomplished and what still lay ahead. The vision troubled her deeply. She had seen similar premonitions during the Clone Wars' early days, flashes of betrayal, darkness coiling around the Republic. But this was more specific, more visceral. It pointed toward something orchestrated, a plan already in motion. She needed to investigate the inhibitor chips. The Kaminoans had assured the Jedi that they were behavioral regulators, nothing more. But if the clones could be forced to act against their will, then their growing force sensitivity would mean nothing. They would become puppets, dancing on strings they could not see. A presence approached from behind, and Shakti turned to find Lama Su entering the hangar. His expression was unreadable as always, but she sensed agitation beneath his calm exterior. "Master Jedi," he said, his tone clipped. "I have received a communication from Coruscant. The Chancellor wishes to speak with you directly regarding the clone's new abilities." Shakti's instincts flared. Did he say why? Only that it is a matter of Republic security. Lama Su handed her a datapad containing the transmission request. "The call is encrypted and flagged as urgent." She took the datapad, her unease growing. Palpatine's interest in the clones had always struck her as excessive, his control over their production and deployment unnervingly absolute. Now, with the Force awakening in them, his attention would intensify. She could not refuse the call without arousing suspicion, but she also could not ignore the warning bells ringing in her mind. "I will take the call in my quarters," she said. "Inform the Chancellor I will respond within the hour." Lama Su nodded and departed, leaving Shakti alone with the weight of her choices. She looked down at the datapad, at the encrypted seal bearing the Republic's insignia, and felt the shadow she had sensed earlier draw closer. The storm outside roared, and the galaxy trembled. Palpatine's hologram materialized in Shakti's private chamber, his expression warm and concerned, the mask of the benevolent leader firmly in place. "Master Jedi," he said, his voice smooth. "Thank you for taking my call. I understand you have made a remarkable discovery on Kamino." Shakti inclined her head, keeping her own expression neutral. "The clones have developed force sensitivity due to an environmental anomaly. The Jedi Council has authorized me to begin training them in basic force discipline." "A wise decision," Palpatine said, though something flickered in his eyes, calculation hidden beneath approval. "These clones represent the Republic's greatest asset. If they can wield the Force, they will be unstoppable against the Separatists. However, I must express concern. Force sensitivity is a dangerous gift, especially in individuals bred for combat. Have you considered the risks?" "I have." Shakti chose her words carefully. "The risks are significant, but so is the opportunity. With proper guidance, the clones can learn to use their abilities without falling to the dark side. And if they fail?" Palpatine leaned forward slightly, his gaze sharpening. "If even one battalion succumbs to anger or fear, the consequences could be catastrophic. The Senate is already uneasy about the Jedi's influence over the military. An army of force-wielding clones loyal only to your order could be perceived as a threat to democracy itself." There it was, the subtle accusation, the seed of doubt planted with surgical precision. Shakti felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice even. "The Jedi do not seek to control the clones, Chancellor. We seek to protect them and the Republic. Their loyalty is to the principles they were created to defend." Of course. Palpatine's tone softened, but the edge remained. "I do not doubt your intentions, Master Jedi, but I must think of the broader political implications. The Senate will demand oversight. They will want assurances that the clones remain under Republic authority, not Jedi authority. I propose we establish a joint committee to monitor their development, with representatives from both the Jedi Council and the Senate." Shakti's mind raced. A Senate committee would mean delays, bureaucracy, and most importantly, Palpatine's direct involvement. She could not allow him to gain more control over the clones, not when her instincts screamed that he was already manipulating events from the shadows. "I will present your proposal to the Council," she said, stalling. "But I must emphasize that the clones' training cannot be subject to political interference. The Force requires subtlety and patience, not oversight by those who do not understand it." Palpatine's smile did not reach his eyes. "Then we must ensure that those who do understand it are given the resources and authority they need. I will speak with the Council directly. In the meantime, Master Jedi, I urge you to be cautious. The galaxy is watching. Any misstep could have far-reaching consequences." The transmission ended, and Shakti stood in the dim chamber, her heart pounding. The conversation had been cordial, even supportive, but beneath every word, she had felt the dark side's presence, subtle, insidious, and utterly controlled. Palpatine was not merely concerned about the clones, he was afraid of them. Or more precisely, he was afraid of losing control over them. She activated her comlink and contacted Obi-Wan Kenobi, who answered within moments. "Shakti, what is it?" "The Chancellor knows about the clones awakening," she said without preamble. "He is already maneuvering to insert Senate oversight into their training. I believe he intends to suppress or control their abilities." Obi-Wan's expression darkened. "That is troubling but not surprising. Palpatine has always been meticulous about maintaining authority over the military, but why would he fear Force-sensitive clones? They could end the war faster, unless he does not want the war to end." Shakti voiced the thought that had been haunting her since the vision. "Obi-Wan, what if the war itself is part of a larger design? What if someone is orchestrating both sides to prolong the conflict?" Obi-Wan fell silent, his face etched with concern. "That is a dangerous accusation, Shakti. One that could fracture the Republic if spoken without proof. I know, but I cannot ignore what I feel. The dark side is at work here, and it is centered on the clones. I need to investigate their inhibitor chips. The Kaminoans claim they are harmless, but if they can be used to override the clones' will, then the entire army could be turned into a weapon against us." Obi-Wan finished her sentence, his voice grim. "I will support your investigation. But be careful. If Palpatine suspects you are questioning his authority, he will move against you." "I understand." Shakti ended the call and stood alone in the darkness. Listening to the rain hammer against the walls, she had taken the first step into a labyrinth with no clear exit. Every choice ahead carried risk. Every ally could be compromised, and every moment of hesitation brought the galaxy closer to a precipice she could not yet see. But the clones were counting on her, and the Force, for all its mystery, had placed this burden on her shoulders for a reason. She would not fail them. In the depths of Tipoca City, beneath the cloning facilities and training centers, lay the medical archives, a sterile maze of laboratories where Kaminoan scientists perfected their craft. Shakti moved through the corridors with purpose, accompanied by a young Jedi healer named Nala Ven, whose expertise in biological force manipulation had made her invaluable to the investigation. They had requested access under the pretense of medical evaluation, examining the clones for any physiological side effects of their awakening. Lama Su had granted permission reluctantly, but only after Shakti invoked the Jedi Council's authority. The inhibitor chip records were stored in a secured vault, accessible only to senior Kaminoan staff. Shakti had used a combination of diplomacy and subtle force persuasion to convince the attending scientist to grant them temporary access. Now, as the vault door hissed open, she felt her pulse quicken. Whatever secrets lay within these files could confirm or dispel her darkest suspicions. Nala Ven moved to the central terminal and began downloading the data, her fingers dancing across the interface. "The chips are organic technological hybrids," she said, reading the schematics. "Implanted during the clone's embryonic development. Officially, they regulate aggression and ensure behavioral compliance. But the neural pathways they connect to are extensive, far more than necessary for simple regulation." Shakti leaned closer, studying the holographic display. The chip's design was intricate, almost elegant, with filaments extending into the clone's prefrontal cortex, limbic system, and even the brainstem. It was not a simple regulator, it was a control mechanism capable of overriding conscious thought. "Can it be removed?" Shakti asked. "Theoretically, yes, but the procedure is extremely dangerous. The chip is integrated so deeply that extraction could cause severe brain damage or death." Nala Ven's expression was troubled. "Master Tai, these chips are not just compliance tools. They are capable of triggering specific behavioral protocols on command. Look here, this coding sequence." She highlighted a section of the chip's programming, and Shakti's blood ran cold. The sequence was labeled Contingency Order 66, and contained instructions that, when activated, would override the clones' loyalty subroutines and redirect them toward a single directive: eliminate all Jedi. Shark T staggered back, her breath catching. This cannot be. It is. Nala Ven's voice was barely a whisper. Every clone carries this programming. It has been there from the beginning. The room seemed to tilt around Shark T. The implications were staggering. The entire Grand Army, built and trained to serve the Jedi, was embedded with a kill switch that could turn them into assassins. And if the clones were now Force-sensitive, their ability to execute such an order would be exponentially more lethal. They could sense Jedi through the Force, track them, overwhelm them before any defense could be mounted. Who authorized this? Shark T demanded, though she already knew the answer. The records indicate it was part of the original contract specifications, Nala Ven said, scrolling through the files. Requested by Supreme Chancellor Palpatine and classified under emergency wartime measures. Of course. The revelation crystallized everything Shark T had suspected but feared to voice. Palpatine was not the Republic's savior. He was its architect of doom, a puppet master who had built the Clone Wars as a machine to devour the Jedi from within. The clones' awakening had thrown his plans into chaos, but the kill switch remained. All he needed was the right moment to activate it. Shark T straightened, her mind racing through options. She could bring this evidence to the Jedi Council, expose Palpatine's treachery, and demand the chip's removal. But such an action would require Senate approval, and Palpatine controlled the Senate. He would deny the accusations, spin the narrative, and turn the Jedi into conspirators against democracy. The Republic would fracture, and the Separatists would surge forward to claim victory. Alternatively, she could work in secret, begin removing the chips one clone at a time, starting with those she had been training. But the process was dangerous and time-consuming, and the moment Palpatine noticed, he would accelerate his plans. "We need to act now," Nala Ven said, reading her hesitation. "If we wait, it will be too late." "I know." Shark T's voice was steel. "Copy these files. Encrypt them. We will need proof if we are to convince the Council. And then we begin removals immediately. Starting with the Force-sensitive clones. If they are free of the chips, they can resist the order when it comes. And the others? The millions who are not yet awakened?" Shark T closed her eyes, the weight of the galaxy pressing down on her shoulders. "We save who we can, and we prepare for war not against the Separatists, but against the Republic itself." They worked through the night, extracting data and formulating a plan. By dawn, the first chip removal was scheduled, a volunteer from the training group who had agreed to undergo the procedure. Shark T would oversee it personally, using the Force to stabilize the clones' neural patterns during extraction. If it succeeded, it would be the first step toward liberation. If it failed, she would be responsible for the death of a man who had trusted her. As she prepared the medical bay, Shark T felt the storm outside intensify, the wind howling against the city's walls. The Force churned with conflicting currents, hope and despair, light and shadow, destiny and chaos. Somewhere in the galaxy, Palpatine was moving his pieces into position, unaware that his perfect design had cracked. The clones were no longer blind tools, they were awakening to their own power, their own choices. And Shark T would ensure that when the moment of betrayal came, they would be ready to fight back. Destiny shifted around them. The surgery took 6 hours. CT-5385, the sergeant who had questioned her during the first meditation session, lay unconscious on the operating table while Shark T and Nala Ven worked in tandem. The Kaminoan medical droid assisted with precision cuts, its mechanical arms steady and emotionless, but the true delicacy came from the Force. Shark T extended her awareness into the clone's mind, guiding the extraction filament by filament, holding his neural patterns stable as the chip was carefully lifted free. Every moment was a precipice, one slip, one surge of trauma, and his brain could shut down entirely. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Nala Ven's hands glowed faintly with healing energy, knitting tissue as fast as it was severed. The chip itself was smaller than Shark T had imagined, a sliver of dark metal and biocircuitry no larger than a fingernail. But its presence in the clone's brain had been absolute, a tether binding him to commands he would never consciously choose to follow. Finally, the droid lifted the chip free and placed it in a sterile containment field. Shakti exhaled slowly, releasing her hold on the clone's mind. His vitals stabilized, brain activity normalized. He was alive. "We did it," Nala Ven whispered, disbelief and relief mingling in her voice. Shakti nodded, but she did not allow herself to celebrate. One success did not guarantee the next, and they had thousands more to liberate. CT-5385 woke hours later in the recovery ward, groggy but alert. Shakti sat beside him, monitoring his condition through the Force. His presence felt different now, clearer, less constrained, as if a veil had been lifted. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse but steady. "Sir, I feel strange, like I can think more clearly. The inhibitor chip has been removed," Shakti explained gently. "You are free of its influence. How do you feel?" The clone was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant. "I remember things differently now. The orders we were given, the way we were told to think. It felt natural before, but now I can see the edges of it, the control." His gaze snapped to hers, sharp and urgent. "The others, they are still chipped. They do not know. I know. And we will free them, one by one. But you must be patient. If the Kaminoans or the Senate learn what we are doing, they will stop us." CT-5385 sat up slowly, wincing at the pain in his head. "Then we work in secret. My brothers trust me. If I tell them the truth, they will volunteer for the procedure." Shakti placed a hand on his shoulder. "You are brave. But this is not just about removing a chip. Once freed, you will face a terrible choice. The Republic you were built to serve is controlled by those who would use you as weapons against the Jedi. When the time comes, you may have to stand against the very institution you were designed to protect. Can you do that?" The clone met her gaze, and in his eyes, Shakti saw something she had not expected: defiance. Not against her, but against the destiny that had been imposed on him. "I did not ask to be born, sir. But now that I am alive, I get to choose what I fight for. And I choose to fight for my brothers. If the Republic wants to make us slaves, then the Republic is the enemy." Shakti felt a chill run through her. The clone's words were seditious, revolutionary, and utterly sincere. He was no longer a soldier programmed for obedience. He was a person claiming his own fate. "Then we fight together," she said quietly. Over the following days, the removals continued in secret. Shakti and Nala Ven worked tirelessly, extracting chips from the clones who had undergone Force training. Each success emboldened them, but each procedure carried risk. 2 clones suffered complications, one slipping into a coma that required intensive Force healing to reverse. But they persisted, driven by the knowledge that every freed clone was a potential ally against the looming darkness. The liberated clones formed a quiet network, spreading information among their brothers with caution and discretion. They did not speak openly of the chips or the conspiracy, but they shared feelings, doubts, and questions that had never been permitted before. The Force bond between them deepened, becoming a tool of solidarity and resistance. They were learning to trust their instincts over their conditioning, to question orders rather than blindly follow them. But secrecy could not last forever. On the 7th day, Lama Su summoned Shakti to his office, his expression colder than usual. "Master Jedi," he said without preamble, "our medical logs indicate irregularities in the clone recovery wards. Several troopers have undergone neural procedures not authorized by this facility." "Explain." Shakti had prepared for this confrontation, but that did not make it easier. "I have been conducting research into the inhibitor chips. Some clones volunteered for removal to test the safety of the procedure." Lama Su's black eyes narrowed. "The chips are proprietary Kaminoan technology, installed at the request of the Republic Senate. Tampering with them without authorization is a violation of our contract and Republic law. The chips are also a violation of sentient rights," Shakti countered, her voice firm. They remove free will, turning living beings into programmable weapons. The clones are not droids, Lama Su. They deserve agency. The clones are products. They exist to serve a function. Lama Su's tone was unyielding. If you continue this unauthorized research, I will be forced to report you to the Chancellor. Shakti's jaw tightened. She had hoped to avoid direct confrontation, but the Kaminoans' loyalty was to profit and contract, not to morality. Then report me, but know that when the truth of these chips becomes public, the Kaminoans will be implicated in the conspiracy. Lama Su stared at her for a long moment, calculating. Finally, he inclined his head. I will give you 1 week to present your findings to the Jedi Council and secure proper authorization. After that, if you have not complied, I will report this matter to Coruscant. It was not a victory, but it was time. Shakti bowed curtly and left his office, her mind already composing the report she would send to the Council. She had evidence, testimony from freed clones, and the chip itself as physical proof. The Council could no longer ignore the threat. They would have to act. But as she walked through Tipoca City's rain-slicked corridors, Shakti felt the shadow in the Force coil tighter, a predator sensing its prey moving beyond reach. Palpatine would know soon. And when he did, he would strike with everything he had. The galaxy trembled. The Jedi Council reconvened within hours of receiving Shakti's encrypted transmission. The evidence she presented was irrefutable schematics of the inhibitor chips, testimony from liberated clones, and the chilling revelation of Contingency Order 66. The chamber, usually a place of calm deliberation, crackled with tension as the Masters absorbed the implications. Mace Windu's voice cut through the silence. This is treason. Palpatine has embedded a mechanism to annihilate the Jedi Order within the very army we command. We must act immediately. Act how? Ki-Adi-Mundi demanded. If we confront Palpatine without Senate support, we risk civil war. The clones outnumber us 1,000 to 1, even with their Force sensitivity. If he activates the Order before we can intervene, then we remove the chips from as many clones as possible, Shakti interjected via hologram. I have already begun the process. With the Council's authorization, I can expand operations, but we need time and resources. Yoda's ears drooped, his ancient face shadowed with sorrow. A trap within a trap, this is. Built the war to destroy us, the Sith have, and now, awaken the clones have, disrupting the design. But still, hold the trigger, the enemy does. Then we take the trigger from him. Obi-Wan spoke with quiet intensity. We confront Palpatine, present the evidence, and demand he relinquish control of the clones to the Jedi Council. He will refuse, Mace said, and then we will have no choice but to remove him by force. The chamber fell silent again, the weight of that statement settling over them. To arrest the Supreme Chancellor would be to shatter the Republic's legitimacy, to turn the Jedi from guardians into insurrectionists. But to do nothing would be to accept annihilation. Yoda closed his eyes, seeking guidance from the Force. The current was turbulent, offering no clear path, only competing visions of disaster and faint hope. Finally, he spoke. Divide, we must. Some Jedi will work with Shakti, freeing the clones. Others will investigate Palpatine, seek proof of his Sith identity. And prepare for battle, we must. For when the truth emerges, war will come not from the Separatists, but from within. The decision was made. The Council began coordinating operations with military precision. Jedi healers were dispatched to Kamino and other cloning facilities. Trusted clone commanders were discreetly informed and offered the choice of chip removal. And a small team, led by Mace Windu and Obi-Wan Kenobi, began shadowing Palpatine, watching for any slip that would confirm his true allegiance. But Palpatine was not idle. In his private chambers, surrounded by Sith artifacts hidden within innocuous decor, he felt the disturbance in the Force. The Jedi were moving against him, faster than anticipated. The clones' awakening had accelerated everything, forcing him to adapt plans that had been decades in the making. He could no longer afford subtlety. He activated a secure channel to Count Dooku. The Jedi have discovered the inhibitor chips. They are attempting to remove them. Dooku's hologram flickered with alarm. If they succeed, they will not. Palpatine's voice was ice. I am accelerating the timeline. Order 66 will be activated within the week. But first, I need you to create a distraction. Launch a major offensive on Coruscant itself. Draw the Jedi into battle. Scatter their forces. While they fight, I will seize control of the Senate and declare the Jedi traitors. And the clones, those still chipped, will obey. Those freed will become enemies of the state. Either way, the Jedi will be crushed. Palpatine's eyes glowed faintly with Sith yellow. This is the moment we have waited for. Do not fail me. The transmission ended. Palpatine stood alone in the darkness, feeling the dark side surge around him like a living storm. The clone's awakening had been an unexpected variable, but he was a master of adaptation. If the Force wanted to introduce chaos into his design, he would harness that chaos and forge it into a weapon sharper than any lightsaber. The galaxy was about to burn, and from its ashes, his empire would rise. The attack on Coruscant came 3 days later, sudden and overwhelming. Separatist dreadnoughts tore through the planet's orbital defenses, disgorging waves of droid fighters and boarding craft. The Jedi Temple's alarms blared as masters and knights scrambled to defensive positions. The Republic fleet, caught off guard, struggled to regroup. It was the largest assault on the capital in the entire war, and it carried the unmistakable signature of desperation or calculation. Shakti felt the attack through the Force, even from Kamino, a wound in the galactic consciousness that pulsed with pain and fury. She abandoned her current surgery and rushed to the communications center, where holographic feeds showed the battle in real time. Coruscant's skyline was ablaze, towers collapsing under bombardment, civilian transports fleeing in panicked streams. Master T. Lama Su appeared beside her, his expression unreadable. The Republic is recalling all available forces to defend the capital. That includes the clone battalions stationed here. No. Shakti's voice was sharp. Those battalions are not ready for deployment. Many still carry active inhibitor chips. The Senate has issued a direct order. We have no choice. Shakti felt the trap closing around her. Palpatine was forcing the clones into battle before she could finish liberating them, ensuring that when he activated Order 66, the majority would still obey. She had to act fast. Delay the deployment, she said. Site equipment malfunctions, medical evaluations, anything. I need 12 more hours. Lama Su hesitated, then nodded slowly. 12 hours. After that, I cannot hold them back. Shakti contacted Nala Ven and every Jedi healer still on Kamino. They would work in shifts, removing chips around the clock. It was a brutal pace, one that risked mistakes and casualties. But there was no alternative. Every clone freed was one less weapon aimed at the Jedi. On Coruscant, the battle raged through the night. Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi led starfighter squadrons against the Separatist fleet, their skill and coordination legendary. But even they could not be everywhere at once. The droids pressed forward, targeting government buildings and the Jedi Temple itself. It was as if Dooku wanted to provoke the Jedi into committing their full strength, to draw them out and expose them. Mace Windu stood on the temple's highest platform, deflecting blaster fire with his violet blade while coordinating defensive positions through comlink. Around him, Jedi Knights fought with desperate intensity, but the sheer number of droids was overwhelming. He reached out through the Force, seeking guidance, and encountered a cold certainty. This was a distraction. The real danger was not the droids. It was what would come after. He opened a secure channel to Yoda, who was leading ground forces near the Senate building. Master, this attack is orchestrated. Palpatine is using it to consolidate power. We need to confront him now, before it is too late. Agree, I do, Yoda replied, his voice strained. But surrounded by loyalists, he is. Approach him directly. We cannot, without triggering civil war. Then we wait for him to make the first move. Already made it, he has, Yoda said grimly. Feel it, I do. The darkness gathers. Soon, the mask will fall. The battle continued for another 6 hours before the Separatist fleet began to withdraw, their assault achieving its purpose. Coruscant was wounded but not broken, its defenses in disarray, its government shaken. Palpatine appeared before the Senate in the aftermath, his face grave, his voice resonant with controlled fury. "Today, we have witnessed the Separatists' true intent," he declared. "They do not seek negotiation. They seek annihilation. And they have been aided, I regret to say, by traitors within our own ranks. The Jedi Order, sworn to protect the Republic, has been infiltrated by those sympathetic to the Separatist cause." Gasps rippled through the Senate chamber. Palpatine raised a hand, silencing them. "I have evidence of this conspiracy, evidence that certain Jedi have been sabotaging our military efforts, compromising our clone forces, and even planning an attack on this very Senate. It was a masterful lie, built on half-truths and strategic misdirection. The Jedi had indeed been removing inhibitor chips, actions that could be framed as tampering with military assets. Shakti's secret operations, intended to save the clones, were now being weaponized against her. Therefore, Palpatine continued, his voice heavy with regret, "I am invoking emergency powers granted to me by this body. Effective immediately, the Jedi Order is to be placed under Senate oversight. Any Jedi who resists will be considered an enemy of the state." The Senate erupted in debate, but the Chancellor's allies moved swiftly to suppress dissent. Within hours, the motion passed. The Jedi were now officially suspect, their autonomy stripped, their every action subject to Republic scrutiny. Mace Windu watched the Senate feed from the temple, his expression carved from stone. "He has outmaneuvered us. If we resist now, we validate his accusations. If we comply, we surrender our ability to stop him. Then we do neither," Obi-Wan said, his voice resolute. "We disappear, go underground, continue freeing the clones, and gather evidence of Palpatine's true identity. When the moment is right, we strike." It was a desperate plan, one that would turn the Jedi into fugitives in the galaxy they had sworn to protect. But there was no other choice. The trap had sprung, and survival now depended on cunning rather than honor. On Kamino, Shakti completed the last chip removal just as Republic transports arrived to collect the clone battalions. She stood in the hangar bay, watching the liberated troopers board their ships, their faces identical but their spirits free. They knew what awaited them on Coruscant, a galaxy turned against the Jedi, a Republic demanding their obedience. But they also knew they had a choice now, and that made all the difference. CT-5385 approached her before boarding, his expression somber. "Sir, what do we do when the order comes, when they tell us to kill you?" Shakti met his gaze, her voice steady. "You do what you were always meant to do. You choose. And you protect those who cannot protect themselves." The trooper nodded, then saluted not the rigid salute of a programmed soldier, but the respect of one free being to another. Then he boarded the transport, and the fleet lifted off into Kamino's stormy sky. Shakti stood alone on the landing platform, watching them disappear into the clouds. The force churned around her, a storm within a storm. The galaxy had reached its tipping point, and soon, everyone would have to choose which side of history they stood on. The force shuddered. Palpatine sat in his office, surrounded by holographic displays showing clone battalions deploying across the galaxy. Each unit was a piece on a vast board, moving according to his design. But some pieces were no longer where they should be. Reports indicated that certain battalions were experiencing communication delays, behavioral anomalies, and unexplained resistance to command protocols. The chip removals had been more extensive than he anticipated. He pressed a button on his desk, and a hidden compartment slid open, revealing a small transmitter, a device keyed to every inhibitor chip in the Grand Army. All he needed to do was activate it, speak the words, and Order 66 would execute. The Jedi would die in a coordinated purge, their extinction complete within hours. But something made him hesitate. The clone's force sensitivity introduced variables he could not fully control. If enough of them had been freed, if they chose to resist, the order might fragment. Some battalions would obey, others would fight back. The resulting chaos could destabilize his carefully orchestrated rise to Emperor. He needed certainty. He needed to test the chip's effectiveness one more time before committing to the purge. Palpatine activated a secure channel to Commander Cody, a clone officer embedded with Obi-Wan Kenobi's forces. Cody was reliable, disciplined, and still chipped. He would serve as the test subject. "Commander Cody," Palpatine said, his voice smooth, "I require your assistance with a matter of Republic security." The hologram of Cody snapped to attention. "Yes, Chancellor. How can I serve? There is reason to believe that General Kenobi has been compromised by Separatist agents. I need you to observe him closely and report any suspicious behavior. If necessary, you may need to detain him for questioning. Do you understand?" Cody hesitated, and in that pause, Palpatine felt the tremor in the Force. The clone's inhibitor chip was still active, but his Force sensitivity created interference, a faint echo of doubt bleeding through the programming. "Sir, General Kenobi has served the Republic with honor. I find it difficult to believe." "I did not ask for your opinion, Commander. I gave you an order." Palpatine's voice hardened slightly. "Will you obey?" The clone's expression tightened, conflict flickering across his face. Finally, he nodded. "Yes, sir. I will comply." The transmission ended, and Palpatine leaned back, analyzing the interaction. The chip still functioned, but the clone's hesitation was troubling. Force sensitivity amplified emotion, and emotion bred doubt. If he activated Order 66 now, some clones would resist, the purge would be incomplete, and survivors would rally against him. He needed to refine the command, layer it with dark side compulsion, make it irresistible even to those awakened. That would require time and preparation, but time was running out. The Jedi were mobilizing, and Shakti's liberation efforts continued to spread. Palpatine made his decision. He would wait 48 more hours, long enough to reinforce the chip's programming through a massive Force ritual, one that would bind every clone's will to his own. It was risky, exposing him to potential detection, but the payoff would be absolute control. He rose from his desk and descended into the hidden chambers beneath his office, where Sith relics and ancient texts lined the walls. The ritual would require sacrifice life energy channeled through the dark side to fuel the binding. Fortunately, the war had provided him with an abundance of death. He would siphon the suffering of soldiers dying in battle, twist it into chains, and lock every clone's mind within a cage they could not escape. The dark side pulsed around him, eager and hungry. Palpatine began to chant in the ancient Sith tongue, his voice resonating with power that had not been heard in the galaxy for 1,000 years. On the Jedi Temple's lower levels, Yoda meditated in silence, his connection to the Force stretched thin by the galaxy's turmoil. He felt Palpatine's ritual beginning, a cold distortion spreading like poison through the cosmic fabric. The dark side was moving, gathering strength for a strike that would dwarf anything the Jedi had faced. He opened his eyes and reached for his comlink. "Master Windu, gather the council. A decision we must make." Tonight, within the hour, the remaining council members assembled fewer than before, as some had been dispatched to lead clone battalions or investigate separatist activity. Yoda addressed them with quiet urgency. "Begun, Palpatine's final move has a ritual he performs to bind the clones to the dark side. If successful, unstoppable the purge will be." Mace Windu's jaw tightened. "Then we strike now. We arrest him, stop the ritual, and seize control of the Senate. And if we fail?" Plo Koon's voice carried sorrow. "If Palpatine is truly a Sith Lord, confronting him directly could lead to our destruction." "Then we will have died fighting," Mace said. "Better that than waiting to be slaughtered." Yoda nodded slowly. "Agree, I do. But alone, we cannot succeed. The clones we need. Those freed, and those who will choose freedom when the moment comes. Shakti's work, critical it is." Obi-Wan spoke up. "Anakin is on Coruscant. If we are to confront Palpatine, we need him with us. He is the chosen one. His power could tip the balance. Or his attachment to the Chancellor could doom us," Mace countered. Anakin's loyalty is divided. He may side with Palpatine if forced to choose. The council fell silent, each master wrestling with the terrible calculus of war. Finally, Yoda rose, his gimmer stick tapping against the floor. Send word to Shaak Ti. Begin the evacuation of younglings and non-combatants. Prepare the temple for siege, and gather those clones who stand with us. Tomorrow, we confront the darkness. Win or lose, the Jedi's fate will be decided. The Masters dispersed, moving with grim purpose. The temple, once a sanctuary of peace, transformed into a fortress. Jedi Knights activated ancient defensive systems, sealed blast doors, and prepared for battle. In the training halls, younglings were ushered to hidden escape routes, their faces confused and frightened. Above it all, the Force churned with conflicting currents: hope, fear, destiny, and chaos colliding in a storm that promised to reshape the galaxy. Anakin Skywalker stood on one of the temple's balconies, watching the city's lights flicker below. He had felt the disturbance in the Force, sensed the darkness gathering, but he did not understand its source. Obi-Wan had called him back to the temple urgently, and now he waited, his instincts screaming that something was terribly wrong. When Obi-Wan finally appeared, his expression was grave. "Anakin, we need to talk. I know, I can feel it. The dark side is stronger than I have ever felt it. It is like it is right here, in Coruscant. It is." Obi-Wan placed a hand on his former Padawan's shoulder. "Anakin, the Council believes Palpatine is a Sith Lord. We have evidence linking him to a conspiracy to destroy the Jedi. Tomorrow, we are going to arrest him." Anakin's world tilted. "That is impossible. Palpatine is my friend. He has guided me, supported me. He has manipulated you," Obi-Wan said firmly. "Everything he has done has been to turn you against the Jedi, to make you doubt us. The clone's inhibitor chips, the war itself, it is all part of his design." "No." Anakin stepped back, shaking his head. "You are wrong. The Chancellor has always fought for the Republic. If anyone is the traitor, Anakin, listen to me." Obi-Wan's voice was desperate. "I know this is hard to accept, but you must trust the Force. Reach out. Feel the darkness around him. You know I would not lie to you." Anakin closed his eyes, extending his awareness toward the Senate building. And there, hidden beneath layers of illusion, he felt it, a presence so cold, so absolute in its malice, that it made his blood freeze. It was Palpatine. It had always been Palpatine. He opened his eyes, and Obi-Wan saw the conflict tearing him apart. "What do I do?" Anakin whispered. "You stand with us. You help us stop him. And you prove that the prophecy was right, that you are the one who will bring balance to the Force." Anakin nodded slowly, though doubt still lingered in his heart. Tomorrow, everything would change, and he would have to choose between the man who had been a father to him and the order that had raised him. Destiny shifted around them. The ritual reached its apex at midnight. Palpatine stood in the center of a circle inscribed with Sith runes, his hands raised, dark side energy crackling around him like black lightning. The room trembled as he channeled the deaths of thousands of soldiers, their final moments of fear and agony twisted into fuel for his binding spell. The inhibitor chips across the galaxy pulsed in response, their programming reinforced, their control absolute. But something resisted. On distant battlefields, in starships and barracks, clones who had been freed felt the dark side's assault on their minds. They screamed, clutching their heads as phantom chains tried to close around their consciousness. Some fell, overwhelmed by the psychic pressure. Others held on, anchored by the Force training Shaak Ti had given them, by the bonds they shared with their brothers. CT-5385, now designated Captain Rex by his battalion, stood on the bridge of a Republic cruiser and felt the ritual's touch like ice in his skull. He gritted his teeth, reaching out through the Force to his brothers, forming a mental shield. "Hold on," he whispered, his voice carried through their shared bond. "Remember who you are. Remember you are free." Across the galaxy, the freed clones fought back, not with blasters but with will. They anchored themselves in the light side, in the memories of choice and agency that Shakti had awakened in them, and slowly, impossibly, they began to resist. Palpatine felt the resistance and snarled. His ritual was incomplete, the binding fraying at the edges. He pushed harder, pouring more of his power into the spell, but the clones' collective consciousness was stronger than he had anticipated. They were not individuals anymore. They were a force unto themselves. With a final surge of effort, Palpatine released the spell, letting it settle into a state of partial completion. The chips still functioned. The clones still carried the programming, but the freed ones had created cracks in the design. When Order 66 came, the army would fracture. He staggered back, exhausted and furious. The Jedi had done this, Shakti had done this, and tomorrow he would make them pay. The dark side coiled around him, and in its whispers he heard the promise of annihilation. Dawn broke over Coruscant, pale and uncertain. The Jedi Temple stood silent, its occupants preparing for the confrontation that would define their legacy. Mace Windu led a strike team himself, Obi-Wan, Anakin, and 3 other masters toward the Senate building. They moved openly, lightsabers visible, their presence in the Force radiant and undeniable. If Palpatine was a Sith, he would feel them coming, and that was the point. No more hiding, no more subtlety. This would be a reckoning. Palpatine awaited them in his office, seated behind his desk, his expression calm. When the Jedi entered, he did not rise. He merely smiled. "Master Jedi," he said pleasantly, "to what do I owe this visit?" Mace ignited his lightsaber, its violet blade humming. "Chancellor Palpatine, you are under arrest for treason, conspiracy, and suspicion of Sith allegiance." Palpatine's smile widened. "Ah, so the mask finally falls. I had hoped we could avoid this unpleasantness, but it seems the Jedi are determined to destroy the Republic they claim to serve." "We serve the Force," Obi-Wan said, "not the darkness you embody." "Darkness?" Palpatine rose slowly, his eyes glinting with malice. "I have brought order to a galaxy drowning in chaos. I have ended the Clone Wars, unified the Senate, and prepared humanity for a glorious future. And you call me dark?" "You engineered the war," Mace said. "You created the clones to destroy us. You are Darth Sidious." Palpatine laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Prove it." And with that, he moved. Faster than thought, he drew a lightsaber from within his robes, a blade as red as blood, and struck. The office exploded into violence. Jedi and Sith clashed in a storm of light and shadow, their blades carving reality into fragments. Palpatine was a master of Form 7, his strikes wild and unpredictable, fueled by rage and dark side power. He targeted Anakin first, sensing the boy's hesitation, trying to force him to choose. But Anakin, tormented by doubt, did not falter. He blocked Palpatine's attack and countered, his blade a blue blur. "You lied to me. You used me. I gave you purpose," Palpatine snarled. "I offered you power the Jedi would never grant, and you threw it away for their hypocrisy." The battle spilled out of the office and into the Senate chamber itself. Senators fled in terror as the combatants carved through walls and platforms. Mace and Obi-Wan coordinated their assault, their experience and discipline offsetting Palpatine's raw power. But the Sith Lord was relentless, drawing on the dark side's infinite well of fury. Then, from outside, the sound of blaster fire erupted. Clone troopers poured into the Senate building, their armor gleaming white, their weapons raised. But they did not fire on the Jedi. They fired on each other. The army had split. Those still chipped obeyed Palpatine's frantic command to eliminate the Jedi. Those freed fought to protect them. The Senate chamber became a war zone, a microcosm of the galaxy's fracture. Jedi and freed clones fought side by side against their programmed brothers, the tragedy of the moment palpable in every strike. This was not victory. This was tragedy written in fire. Palpatine, seeing his controls slipping, unleashed his final weapon. He raised his hands, and Force lightning erupted from his fingertips, raw, unfiltered dark side energy that arced across the chamber. Jedi screamed as the lightning found them, their bodies convulsing. Clones fell, their armor smoking. Mace Windu pushed forward, his blade absorbing the lightning, redirecting it back toward Palpatine. The Sith Lord staggered, his face contorting with rage. "You cannot win. Even if you kill me, the Empire will rise. The clones will obey. The Jedi will fall. Not today," Mace said, and drove his blade forward. But Palpatine vanished in a burst of dark side energy, teleporting through the Force to an escape shuttle hidden beneath the Senate building. By the time the Jedi reached the platform, he was gone, disappearing into Coruscant's labyrinthine underworld. Mace lowered his lightsaber, breathing hard. Around them, the battle had ceased. The chipped clones, their link to Palpatine severed by his retreat, stood confused and disoriented. The freed clones moved among them, deactivating their weapons, speaking in low, urgent tones. Anakin stared at the destruction, his hands trembling. "What have we done?" "We have exposed the truth," Obi-Wan said. "Now we must finish what we started." The Jedi regrouped, coordinating with the freed clones to secure the Senate and prevent further violence. But the galaxy had already seen the footage: senators fleeing, Jedi attacking the Chancellor, clones firing on each other. Palpatine's narrative of Jedi treachery was being broadcast across every holonet channel, twisted and amplified by his loyalists. The Republic was fracturing. And the Jedi, once its guardians, were now its outlaws. The Force shuddered. In the days that followed, the galaxy teetered on the edge of total war. Palpatine, though driven into hiding, continued to command loyalist forces through encrypted channels. He declared himself Emperor in absentia, framing the Jedi as coup conspirators who had tried to assassinate him. Entire star systems chose sides, some rallying to the Jedi's defense, others pledging loyalty to the new empire. The clone army split into factions. Those freed by Shaak Ti's efforts formed the core of the Jedi-aligned forces, their numbers smaller but their resolve unshakable. Those still chipped were gradually liberated by Jedi strike teams, though the process was slow and costly. And those whose chips could not be removed in time were placed in stasis, their fate uncertain. Shaak Ti became the linchpin of the resistance, her knowledge of the clones and her connection to their awakening making her indispensable. She coordinated medical teams, trained new Force sensitives among the liberated clones, and provided strategic counsel to the Jedi Council. But the weight of responsibility aged her visibly. Every clone she could not save haunted her. Every battle fought by her students carried the risk that they would fall to the dark side under the strain of war. CT-5385, now called Rex, became a symbol of the clone rebellion. He led his battalion with courage and wisdom, his Force sensitivity allowing him to anticipate enemy movements and protect his brothers. But he also carried the burden of choosing to fight against the Republic he had been built to serve. In quiet moments, he wondered if freedom was worth the cost of betrayal. One night, on a Republic cruiser drifting through hyperspace, Shaak Ti found Rex standing alone in the observation deck, staring at the stars. She approached quietly, her presence a gentle ripple in the Force. "You carry a heavy burden," she said. Rex nodded without turning. "I killed my brothers today. Men I trained with, fought beside. They did not choose to attack us. The chips made them, but I still pulled the trigger. You did what was necessary to protect those who could be saved." Necessary. Rex's voice was hollow. "That is what the Kaminoans said when they designed us, that we were necessary. Tools to serve a purpose. I thought freedom meant I would never have to be a tool again. But here I am, still fighting someone else's war." Shaak Ti placed a hand on his shoulder. "You are not a tool. You are a person who chose to stand against tyranny. That choice defines you, not the circumstances of your birth." Rex finally turned to face her, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "Do you think we can win?" "I do not know," Shaak Ti admitted, "but I know we must try. Because the alternative is a galaxy enslaved by fear and darkness, and I believe the Force brought you into existence for a reason, not as a weapon, but as a testament to the power of choice." Rex held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "Then I will keep fighting. For my brothers, for the ones we have lost and the ones we can still save." They stood together in silence, watching the stars blur past, two souls bound by war and hope, carrying the weight of a galaxy in transformation. Destiny shifted around them. The final confrontation came not in a grand battle, but in a shadowed meditation chamber deep within the Jedi temple, reclaimed after fierce fighting. Palpatine had been tracked to Coruscant's underworld, and a strike team led by Yoda prepared to confront him. The ancient Jedi Master moved through the darkness with grim determination, his connection to the Force sharper than ever. He would end this, one way or another. Palpatine awaited him in a ruined hall, its walls scarred by forgotten battles. He stood at the center, his red lightsaber ignited, his presence in the Force a void that swallowed light. "Master Yoda," Palpatine said, his voice mocking. "Come to die, have you? Come to end this, I have," Yoda replied, igniting his own blade. "Too long, your shadow has lingered. Balance, the Force demands." They clashed, two titans of their respective philosophies, light and dark, colliding with apocalyptic force. The hall shook as their power tore through reality, each strike reshaping the space around them. Yoda moved with precision honed over centuries, his small form a blur of green light. Palpatine countered with raw aggression, his attacks wild and overwhelming, but Palpatine was not fighting alone. Through the dark side, he drew on the suffering of the galaxy, every death in the Clone Wars, every betrayal, every moment of despair. He channeled it into a storm of Force lightning that filled the hall, seeking to annihilate Yoda in a single cataclysmic burst. Yoda stood at the center of the storm, his lightsaber spinning, deflecting the lightning back toward its source. But the effort was immense, pushing him to the edge of his strength. He could feel the dark side pressing against his mind, whispering promises of power, tempting him to strike with anger, to embrace hatred as a weapon. He refused. Instead, he reached deeper into the light, connecting not just to the Force but to every living being fighting for survival. Every clone choosing freedom, every Jedi sacrificing for others, every civilian hoping for peace. Their collective will became his anchor, their light his shield. With a cry that echoed through the Force, Yoda pushed back. The lightning reversed, surging toward Palpatine with blinding intensity. The Sith Lord screamed as his own power consumed him, his body convulsing, his illusions shattering. For a moment, his true form was revealed, ancient, withered, a creature sustained by darkness alone. And then the light broke through. Yoda's blade pierced Palpatine's chest, and the dark side recoiled, its anchor severed. The Sith Lord crumpled, his lightsaber extinguishing, his presence in the Force fading into nothingness. Yoda stood over the body, his own strength nearly spent. He had won, but the cost was visible in every line of his face. Around him, the hall fell silent, the storm dissipating like a nightmare at dawn. The war was over, but the galaxy it left behind was forever changed. In the aftermath, the Jedi Order and the clone resistance began the long process of rebuilding. The Republic was dissolved, replaced by a coalition government that included representation from freed clones, Jedi, and independent star systems. It was fragile, imperfect, but it was built on choice rather than control. The clones, now fully awakened to their Force sensitivity, established their own enclaves where they trained in both combat and philosophy. They called themselves the Sentinel Legion, guardians who would never again be tools for tyrants. Shakti remained their primary teacher, guiding them toward balance, ensuring they understood both the power and responsibility that came with the Force. Rex became the Legion's first commander, a role he accepted with humility and determination. Under his leadership, the clones began to explore their individuality, choosing names, pursuing interests beyond war, and forming connections with the wider galaxy. They were no longer an army. They were a people. The Jedi Order, scarred but enduring, reformed its practices. The Council recognized that their detachment and rigid hierarchy had contributed to their near destruction. They opened their doors wider, trained adults alongside children, and embraced the idea that the Force belonged to all beings, not just an elite few. Anakin Skywalker, freed from Palpatine's influence, chose to remain a Jedi but took a less formal role, traveling the galaxy to help where he was needed rather than adhering to strict council mandates. He carried the weight of his choices, but also the knowledge that he had, in the end, chosen the light. And Shaak Ti, standing on Kamino's landing platform once more, watched as a new generation of clones prepared to leave for lives they would define themselves. The storm still raged outside, but inside there was warmth and hope. She felt the force settle around her, no longer turbulent but flowing with purpose. The galaxy had been tested, torn apart, and stitched back together. It would carry scars for generations, but it had also learned a lesson written in fire and sacrifice, that freedom, once claimed, must be defended by those willing to stand against the darkness. The clones had been born to serve, but they had chosen to live, and in that choice, the galaxy found balance.